graduate student named David Adler has asked to interview her. She is a private person. She's reluctant, but she has done the interview. And then David Adler has gone missing. His fiance has hired a private investigator, and she's going now to the private investigator's office to meet with him. The PI's building houses a Malaysian restaurant at street level. A cook on a smoke break glares at me and flicks his cigarette too close as I shove the glass door open to shrieks of grinding metal. The stairs, swathed in a stained runner, the green of penicillin, creak at every step. Sections of the banister have crumbled away. I've streamed the occasional black and white noir, so I'm half expecting a smoked glass door with sand spade lettering, but instead I find a cheap wooden one splintered around the knob. I knock, and the growl from the phone invites me in. The front room doesn't look much like an office. There's a futon covered in a greasy sheet, a ragged rag rug, a pot displaying a ficus long deceased. Behind a dusty wooden desk sits the PI, a white man stranded somewhere in his 60s. With his fat, stubbled cheeks and unruly graying ringlets, he doesn't look much like a PI either, more like a cherub gone to seed. On his desk, a stack of creased manila folders abut a glass ashtray, where a dozen half-smoked cigarettes molder. Nearby sits a takeout container from the Malaysian place, a single noodle lurching tentacle-like over the side. Jake Levitz hauls himself out of the chair, and before I can stop him, he swims his hand forward, pressing the rough nicotine-stained pads of his fingers against mine in a boneless shake. Then he waves me toward the futon. Sit, glad you made it. It's Vivian, right? You go by Viv? Only under duress. Okay, Vivian it is. Call me Jake. You want something to drink? I've got water and... Nope, I finished all the pop. Just water. I'm good, I say, lowering myself gingerly to the sheet. You want a cigarette? I don't smoke. Yeah, I'm trying to cut down. Jake gestures to a pharmacy back on the shelf behind him. Got the patches, gonna start wearing them. He opens one of the folders, hefting a pencil in his pudgy fingers. So, Vivian, let's do this. You met with David Adler 2 weeks ago on Tuesday? Yes, around 2 in the afternoon. He said he wanted to interview me for a project on critics, how we develop our practice, our style. It was research for his thesis, he said. We met at a patisserie near my house. What's this patisserie called? He asked, clearing his throat wetly. La Religieuse. La what? I spell it for him, slowly. So what all did he ask you about? Theater mostly, my favorite playwrights, my favorite plays. Boring if you're not in the business. I go to plays, he says, tapping his pencil against the paper. Do you? Of course he does. He takes his aged mother to a matinee musical every spring with a stop at Junior's for cheesecake after. Yeah, saw the Beckett One acts at the East Side last month. You go? You like him? This surprises me. Yes, I did. Rockabye especially. Me, I love the one with the mouth. Crazy. So anyway, you and the subject. That's what I call Adler, the subject. You meet at this cafe, you eat some pastry, you praise Melpomene. You know the Greek muse of drama? Lady, he says, raising his eyebrows in my general direction. I know all kinds of stuff. Stuff that would knock your bobby socks off. Never know what'll come in handy on the case. That's what they teach you in PI school. I once broke open a fraud ring just because I knew who won the 69 series. Who? Mets in 5. Back to your pastry date. David, how'd he seem to you? Seem? Yeah, you know, appear, act, behave. I can hear Hamlet in my head. Seems, madam, nay, it is. Because I don't really know how to answer this question. Do I describe the David Adler who interviewed me, or the man I caught a glimpse of as we finished? Nervous, I say finally, or that was how he seemed at first. He said something about how he hadn't done a lot of interviews before, human subjects were a new thing for him. He had a chocolate croissant. Is that relevant? Could be, could be. There's something else I ought to tell him, some further detail, but my mind has shelved it just out of reach. By the way, I say, where was he enrolled? I tried to look him up online. Some school in New Jersey is what I heard, not sure which, though I guess I should probably talk to his dean or supervisor or whatever. Came to the city to finish his master's, whatchamacallit, thesis. Hey, that reminds me, funny story about New Jersey. He leans forward in his chair. The metal makes an affronted screech. Last month I went out to Sea Caucus on a case. There was this escort. See, she had this one John... No, on second thought, I shouldn't say more. It might offend your ladylike sensibilities. Who says I'm so ladylike? Never seen someone sit on a couch while trying not to actually touch it. Nicely observed. They teach you that in PI school? Lady, there is no PI school. Maybe I'm just trying not to get period blood all over your sheet. He sits back, the chair screams, and raises his hand in a gesture of surrender. Okay, point yours. Thank you. Thank you for laughing at my jokes. Do we need these? Do we need need microphones?
No.
I mean, it will give us authority, but I think we're okay.
I can
Okay,
project. Yep.
okay.
Yep. Okay, so.
Do you have actor training too, Jacqueline?
No, but I am a loudmouth, so
Good.
it should be
Same
fine.
thing.
Anyway, so fun, like, obvious just from your reading. Such a fun book. The characters, the voices, I love that. There's so many things in there I really love. Just want to say that first. And so thought maybe we would just start with you just kind of giving us the lay of the land, the story, and maybe starting out by telling us where it came from, where the genesis of the story began.
Yeah, I wonder if a couple of you know this. Like, it was sort of my party piece, which I would tell over the years, because it's easily the most interesting thing that has ever happened to me, which is when I was in my 20s and I was working at the Village Voice, a man called and asked to interview me, not a grad student. He said he was writing for one of the online journals, which, you know, this is a long time ago, so they were kind of new at the time. And honestly, I can't remember which one he said. Could have been Salon, could have been Slate, could have been Mental Floss. And he asked if he could interview me because he was doing a piece about critics, how people get to be critics. I'm incredibly flattered, you know, like no one wants to, I'm a junior critic at the Village Voice, please, you know, like I still look like a very awkward 16, and when I go to pick up my tickets at the box office and I say Soloski, people look over my shoulder because they are expecting a small Russian man, because apparently like I wrote with more authority than I in any way projected. So we do the interview. At the time I'm using like a really shitty, like I had mini disc recorders, you remember those? And he comes, oh, I'm sorry, no, I have mini cassettes. And he shows up with a mini disc and it's so sleek, and I'm like, oh, fancy, you know, look at the online people. And we do the interview. I'm a grad student at the time. I'm getting a PhD, and so I'm fucking insufferable, right? I spend the whole time like talking about like the decline of the avant-garde, you know, via this guy Philip Auslander, who's later like convicted in like a bad plagiarism scandal. But at the time, like I'm really like I love Auslander, and the transgressive versus the horrible, like absolutely horrible for like, you know, hours. And he leaves. He says he'll be in touch with follow-ups. I don't hear from him. I'm like, I'm not good, no notes. I talk in paragraphs, fantastic. And then I do get a call on my flip phone, right? Like a few weeks later, and it is a woman, his fiance, saying that he's disappeared, and I'm the last person to have seen him. And I did end up talking to a private investigator on the phone. I did end up at a certain point going to the police because I thought I had evidence that something bad had happened. But at a certain point, when I maybe could have kept going, I didn't, because I'm not a detective. And it just felt like it wasn't my story. It wasn't my story to tell. And also, you know, as many of you know, like, I'm a little messy around the edges, but I'm like a pretty stable person with like a good sort of support network. And so, as strange as this was, and it was strange, this wasn't going to throw me, or this wasn't going to deeply unsettle me. But it always stuck with me, because if you get handed a story like that, you know, just like on a platter, you know, with like parsley all around, like, you know, you have to do something with it. And so the challenge then was, okay, who would the person be, or what would the circumstances be that she could not let this go in the way that I'd been able to say, no thank you, at a certain point? What was someone, and it like, I don't know, it's a weird story. I'll tell you the whole thing over drinks sometime after I read the book. Like, at one point I did start sleeping with a knife under my bed. Like, it got weird. Whoa. For sure. I know!
I would be there for the drinks.
Yes.
I
But I let it go. So who was someone who couldn't let it go? And that's how Vivian sort of came to be.
And I don't know how much you want to steer clear of spoilers, but so there's the other half of this story, the resolution of the story, which, you know, someone could have imagined that you came up with that first, because it kind of is a critic getting their comeuppance a little bit. So the book talks a lot about being a critic, the nature of criticism, and it's interesting to hear that that wasn't sort of the initial inspiration. What is your book saying about criticism? What do you have the experience of being with a theater critic.
I mean, in some ways I've done a terrible thing, because in some ways the book confirms all the things that people really hate and fear about critics. You know, this idea of like, oh, someone's a critic because they failed in another form. You know, Vivian, we find out very, very early, I'm not spoiling anything, was an actress at one point. Although I wouldn't say that she failed in that. She just couldn't do it anymore. And so, you know, there's an easy read of it that's like, oh, she couldn't do this, so she had to, you know, just kind of be nasty about it. But I sort of see it as she couldn't do this, so she had to be as close as possible to the art form that she loved, and that criticism can be, is not always. You know, when my kids were born, I fell asleep at every single play I was supposed to review for like 5 minutes. It was like a quick 5-minute cat nap, and then I'd be fine. But you know, so that wasn't an act of service, right? But criticism can be an act of service. It can be a way of serving a form that you really, really love. And Vivian is maybe a little too damaged to do that. But, you know, I think even so, what comes through is she does have a love for the form. She does believe in rigor, which is something I believe in, although she doesn't have enough sort of flexibility or compassion, which are things that I also think are very useful additives in criticism. I mean, something that I talk about sometimes when I'm talking to college classes, high school classes about journalism is that I'll admit, like, I have a sliding scale, you know, so that, like, if something is off Broadway and everyone's, like, trying so hard and nobody's, you know, they're getting paid in, like, a drink ticket and some peanuts, if they're getting paid at all, that demands a different rigor than if something's on Broadway and they've had literally millions of dollars in backing and readings and workshops and they've had the time to get it right. Then if you've got a knife, it can come out, you know, because like they should know better. Although even so, it's usually not the fault of the actors, you know, and or the designers. And so you try to have a little bit of balance. The exception, I think, is if something, and I run into this sometimes a lot less often than I did early career, but if something's actively offensive, then like I don't care. I don't care who made it. And like I think the third thing that the Village Voice ever sent me to review was a production like way off Broadway. I can, you know, I tend to block out trauma, so I don't remember which theater. It was like, you know, some like church on the east side or something. It was a new version of the Lysistrata, which most of you will know is the ancient Greek comedy by Aristophanes. Women go on a sex strike until the men stop fighting a war. But this was a cool modern update. Like, I should also say it was terrible. Like in every quadrant, you know, like acting, writing, you know, singing, dancing, choreography. It was just like no. Like at one point they came out with like huge paper mache phalluses, and you were just like no, can't unsee. But like all of which is fine and would have been like, oh, they tried. Except in this version, the women wouldn't have sex until, I wish I were making this up, the white men stopped day trading and over consuming, and the black men stopped selling drugs and guns. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
So I wrote in the Voice, I'm like, this is terrible, right? And like incredibly offensive. And the Voice got at least one, I think there may have been more, like angry letter the next week. Just, you know, and like, you know.
That's not doing that bad.
Right, but
one angry letter.
I
feel like that's
right.
fine.
But like, you know, which was written a little more politely, but you know, the text, which was barely even sub, was like, you stupid bitch. Like you have no, you know, it's like you have no sense of humor. I was falling out of my seat laughing. You know, it's the you can't you take a joke sort of thing. And so at that point, you're just like, you're never gonna win.
Yeah.
You're never gonna win. You're never going to please everybody. You're never gonna get it right for everybody. And so you just have to sort of like trust your instincts and try to make it like medium fun for the reader and do the best you can.
It seems like kind of an interesting tension in thinking about, is my criticism coming across as like the official word on this, or is it just my opinion? And that would be kind of a difficult thing to navigate. You know, am I making pronouncements that are like, you know, it forever? How do you think about that?
I mean, I will say it was more difficult. I will say, you know, one of the nice things I did, and I didn't intend to, but I realized after, is that Vivian is someone who has no anxiety about work or no anxiety about like her gifts. which is so nice. That's not me. But I wanted a woman who like didn't have any anxiety about like her gifts or her talents, or wasn't gonna be like, is this okay? Did I do a good job? Like, she knows she's talented, she knows she's done a good job. For me, there was definitely, I felt it more early career. I would very often have this feeling when the lights would go down, I would think, oh, is this the night where I have nothing to say? Is this the night where like there's just nothing to write, where like I just have to do what I have seen colleagues do and like vamp, you know, it's like 400 words of plot summary and then like it was fine, you know, and then you duck out. But you know, I now have, I mean, I kind of recently I needed health insurance, and so I took a reporter job. So I actually don't do, as of May, I don't do that much criticism anymore, but I did at that point have about 25 years and like a doctorate in theater. So at a certain point I could be like, I think I'm okay. Like I think I have the authority to speak to this, and I think it's gonna be all right. But you know, my philosophy, which, you know, Vivian does borrow a lot from, you know, my work life, not my personal life, please just everyone know. Like is that I think journalism, I think when you're writing a kind of sort of like newspaper journalism criticism, it's about how has this work met the moment? And the moment is always filtered through the medium of you, right? It's about you, it's about, you know, sort of how you're feeling towards it, you know, you take an informed subjectivity to it. And so it's not like how does this work exist for all time everywhere, but what happened at this particular production on like September 16th, you know, when Donald Trump was doing God knows what, you know, or something else was going on. So it's really this, you're this sort of crucible where the work and the moment can meet, and it's filtered through your sensibility. So it doesn't have to be a sort of grand pronouncement on a high for all time. It just has to be a record of what happened, in that moment.
So, kind of two bundled questions. First, an easy one. Did you consider making this a play or a screenplay? And then the book draws attention to that gulf between producers of art and consumers or critics of art. What was it like for you? That's a little bit specious because critics also make art. That's a form of art. But what was it like for you, sort of crossing that gulf and
So no, I never thought it could be a play, and the reason for that is that plays are so hard. They're so hard. Okay. They're so hard. Like telling an entire story like just in dialogue with a couple of stage directions, like oh my god, it's so hard. I don't think I've written anything longer than like a 3 or 4 minute like comedy sketch, because I used to do sketch comedy in college. Because it's so hard. So I never thought that it could be a play. But and I don't think that I thought that much about what it would mean as a critic to try my hand at something like a novel until it was basically ready to be out. And then I was like, oh, this is weird. I'm gonna get reviewed. Turnabout is fair play. And like, there have been some positive reviews, there have been some negative reviews, but I think one of the funniest reviews I saw, and like, I think it's so demented to tag someone on Twitter in a negative review. Like, I don't know, like, what kind of monster, but I know what kind of monster. It's Jonathan. So there's like an older critic who's kind of been around for a long time, and he wrote this incredibly spoilery review, which is like, Alexis Soloski has written a novel, but it's not what you think it is. But by which he meant, it's not what he thought it was, because he thought it was going to be like a deep insider look at like criticism at the New York Times. And instead he got a work of psychological suspense, and he was so mad. But I also love to imagine like who he thinks would be like the like huge like literary public who was like, yes, what I really want is a novel about how theater criticism is practiced. Yeah. Like give me like 400 pages of that like straight into my veins. So and that has been weird. It's nice doing this in my 40s and not in my 20s, where like I have enough sense of self that like if there is a review like that, I'm just like, oh, that's messed up. But like it doesn't, like I'm not kept up at night, in agony. So yeah. I I mean, I wonder if, like, I did, name dropping makes me feel ill, but I'm friendly with Isaac Butler, who wrote a wonderful nonfiction book. I encourage you all to read, The Method: How America Learned to Act, which is about method acting, and it's so good. And he read an early draft, and suddenly I called him because it had never really occurred to me. This was after the book had been bought, so I knew that it would come out at some point. And I said, "Oh my God, are people going to think that this is me? Like, are they going to think I'm an absolute monster?" And he was like, "Yes." So yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
So you've spent your life kind of steeped in the dramatic arts. Do you feel like you learned or observed anything new about that contrast between dramatic arts and narrative or literary arts? You know, did it expand your sense of theater, or did you realize that there are things you can do with a play that you can't do with a novel, or vice versa?
I feel like both theater and novels benefit hugely from a suspension of disbelief, which is something I'd never really thought about before, but then I realized that I could, use it to my advantage. And so I definitely thought of it that way. I mean, I tried to interrogate a little bit, like, what is that feeling? What is that feeling of being in the audience for something rather than participating, rather for doing, which is something that, like, I'd just done. I hadn't really thought about. So I did definitely spend some time thinking about those things. I mean, probably the biggest help for this book is that I have written features, pretty much my whole career. And for a while, I was writing a column for the style section, which was hilarious. I was like, really? Thank you. But no. So I was writing a column for the style section called Encounters. The whole point of this column was that you would go hang out with a celebrity while the celebrity did something that their publicist had assured us they were very interested in doing. And sometimes that was true. Like, sometimes you would find people who had, like, crazy, like, weird expertise. And sometimes they would show up and be like, "Wait, we're doing knitting?" And I'd be like, "Oh, yes we are." But that's how you end up going ice skating with Hugh Dancy, and going up in a plane while Manny Jacinto from The Good Place, jumps out of it, which was scary. They gave me a pack, and I was like, "Oh no, like I'm just going to the plane to observe," and they were like, "Yes, but this is if you fall out of the plane," and I was like, "I didn't know that was an option." And then I would get paid $900, but because I had so many years and years and years of doing that, you would do the interview and then you would transcribe it. And there's nothing like just sort of sitting down, having to, like, listen to your voice with all the and ums and, like, lots of head desk stuff that makes you understand how people talk and makes you understand what dialogue could look like. And so I think I learned more about dialogue from just that practice of years and years and years of interviews than I probably did even from the theater. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think it's fun sometimes when your voicemail will now, like, transcribe things, and it's like, ooh, that's just like studying the.
It's also weird how much your voicemail gets wrong.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
That is true. So, how about the noir element? So that is, like, such a fun part of this, and her voice is so noir. And it sounds like, the conception of the plot may have had something to do with dictating that, but is noir a thing that you love?
Oh my God, so much.
And let's talk about Easter eggs a little bit, because this book is full of Easter eggs, theater ones. I'm curious if there are, like, noir.
I mean, probably,
things.
but maybe not intentionally.
Yeah.
I think the eggs are all theater eggs. I love it. I love it so much. I love it because it is such a heightened genre. I love it because it's such a romantic genre. I love it. I also, James M. Cain, Dashiell Hammett, Cornell Woolrich, Ross McDonald, Raymond Chandler, Dorothy B. Hughes, who no one reads enough, and like please go read The Expendable Man, and don't read anything about The Expendable Man before you read it, because it is one of the all-time great trick novels, and in a really but in like a deeply sort of like socially conscious way. And so this may be spurious, but I read something years ago about Raymond Chandler where he would cut his manuscript into strips, and I don't know, 3 lines long, 5 lines long, every page. And every strip had to have like a little gift. Like it had to have like a turn of phrase or a piece of figuration or like a really snappy line of dialogue. And I was like, what other genre, I mean, there are other genres, romance is one that, I'm not a huge reader of, but it just wants to give so much to the reader, that like just wants the reader to have a good time. And I love noir for that. I love noir for the how snappy it is, and the pace of the plots, and the variety, and the interest in humans and how they work. And so it really is delicious, because like I read literary fiction and I like a lot of it, but sometimes I'm like, this is so good, but what if something happens?
Yeah, oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. Totally. So,
a lot of things happen in Jacqueline's book. It is eventful.
I like for things to happen as
Yeah.
well. That is kind of a prerequisite
Yeah.
for me with stories, yeah. So your main character's voice was one of my favorite things about this. She is just so clever, so sharp and funny. How did you cultivate that voice? That felt very self-consciously noir. Like it was like that, babe walking into the detective office, taking over the story, and it's her story instead.
Yeah, although a babe who talks about period blood.
Yes, which is even better, yeah.
I mean, so I'm not like,
And is it you? Is
well,
that you?
that's the thing. It's like I'm not a huge psychoanalytics person, but like I'm very interested in the Jungian idea of the shadow self, and there is an idea that like the character is not me, but what if you had permission? Like, what if you had permission to kind of say exactly what you meant, as opposed to like I was, a press agent was being really difficult a couple of weeks ago, and I was getting really frustrated. And I said to my editor, Jeremy, who I love, my TV editor, I was like, I wrote her like a pretty shirty email. And then I kind of said, well, and he's like, oh, you mean you apologized one time less? And I was like, yes, and I took out some exclamation points. Because I have been socialized to apologize for everything. And I always and I want people to like me, and I do write emails, and it's genuine. It is genuine. It's so genuine. But they're like, hi, thank you, and a lot of that. And I was like, what if not? I can't do it in my own life, God knows. But what if you just said exactly what you meant? And what if you didn't go to the things that you didn't want to go to? And what if you did just the very smallest veneer of performance to keep the wheels of society turning, but said no thank you to the rest of it? And so there was something really tart and brittle, but also freeing about writing a character who was just saying no and does not want to be liked.
And also rather a self-destructive streak to it. She does some things in the story that are you're really gonna do that? Wow.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing.
Which is also exhilarating.
I make such safe choices.
Yeah.
Such safe choices. And I've always made pretty safe choices, and then after I had kids, I was pathologically about making safe choices, you get into this very do you have a helmet? That seems like a really high thing to climb. And it is exciting to write someone who runs toward the danger, because I'm always gonna run away. If there's danger, I'm we're going now.
Yeah.
But it is exciting to write someone who doesn't want to do that, who is going to make it. The people who make safe choices are not that interesting to write about, right?
Oh yeah.
Because then they go home, go to bed, everything's fine. I don't know. So what if not? What if you do something a little more dangerous? It's funny. I'll admit I needed her to be a little bit unstable. And I also needed her to be a little bit dishonest with herself emotionally, and she definitely has some substance issues. And in my experience, a lot of substance issues come for people who have a hard time feeling their feelings, just have a hard time sort of existing in the world without some kind of a buffer. And she is one of those people where she just needs a little cushion, which then gets to be a bigger cushion. But men who drink a lot are a staple of noir. Men who have problems are a staple of noir. Like, who's met like a healthy detective, like with like great personal relationships, like goes for a run every morning, does a little windsurfing, like never. And it's interesting because like I can take a bad review, absolutely, and there have been some where I've been like, okay, but there has been a thread, even in some of the good ones, where they're just like appalled that this woman like drinks and uses pills, and they called her like an unreliable narrator. She's pretty reliable.
Just because she drinks.
She does drink too much, and she does take pills, and I hope that she's gonna find her way into a treatment program at some point. I think she could really use it, and I want the best for her because I'm done writing about her. So Godspeed. But it doesn't make her unreliable. She's a little unreliable because she's not emotionally honest with herself, but that's not because there's a vodka habit. And but it was interesting to me to see that some of that, which I wasn't expecting at all, just kind of felt gendered in a weird way. I don't think that a male character who drank as much as she did, like I don't think it would have showed up as like, oh God, this, how dare she? So yeah.
So what are there more books in store for you? What are your future projects?
There's at least one more, which is it's also in the psychological suspense. I decided to set it in 2 historical time periods because I was like, one wouldn't be hard enough. So it's 2/3 in 1972 and 1/3 in 1997, which I'm so sorry to say is history.
It's last century. Students call it and ask if they can cite sources from it.
It's set in the very late 20th century. And it's about an experimental theater company that kind of may or may not be a cult, which is funny because I have a novelist friend, Tara Isabel Burton, who just published a book about an experimental theater company that may or not be. And I was like, I didn't think I needed to like run on this one, like I thought the lane was going to be wide for a while, but apparently something's in the water. So let's make it a trilogy. You too.
Yeah. I mean, nobody else wrote a vampire novel at the same time as me, so I was really lucky about that.
And then I kind of never want to write another book again because I want to be someone who sleeps and has hobbies. But I started thinking about another one, and it's kind of like Rebecca, but in a Hollywood writer's room.
Oh, fun!
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
I know.
Yeah.
Fun.
When you get the ideas, then it just like takes you over, and you're like, oh, I guess I don't even have a choice anymore.
Yeah. What if books were fun? Books were fun?
Yeah, I love that. Maybe by number 3 they will be for both of us.
Yeah.
We'll have to check back in and see about that. Well, do we want to move to questions?
Yeah. Have we covered everything? Have we done it? Have we done it all?
Not nearly.
Yeah. It's okay if you don't have questions. It's absolutely okay.
I have a little question, and maybe it's for both of you. So I often use Goodreads as my own personal, like, what I read, and I often just write, like, did like this, like, somebody told me to pick it up, it was fine, but whatever. Like, I use it just to remind myself, like, what it was, so, like, when I go back in a year and I'll be like, did I like that book? Anyways, do you guys, I hear anything on Goodreads is good for authors, but do you guys care or read the reviews on Goodreads and how much, like, salt you give them?
Oh, I'll be interested to hear what you think. I actually don't because I love myself and I want to protect myself. My mom sent me a link and I was like, what? Which is honestly like, my mom is like chaotic neutral to sometimes chaotic evil. And I was like, seriously, what are you doing? She also sent me a link to like a bananas Kirkus review, and I was like, why do you want this? Why do you want this for me? So I try not to, you know, at a certain point maybe I'll have a friend look, because if there's something sort of coming up, maybe it will be useful, you know, as I think about next books, but like the book's already written, so like you can't fix it at this point. So you just kind of have to like let it go and hope people like it. I mean, they're definitely like, I did see a couple, my mom, you know, that were like,
Her review, scathing.
yeah, where it was just like, oh, I really wanted to like this book, but I just hate the main character so much. Over and over
I
and
recently
over. Yeah.
I zoomed into a book club that had read my book, and one of the book club members made sure I knew that she hated my book.
Oh, what a weird choice.
Yeah, and he hated the character, and at the end of this rather long rant, I was like, well, I'll find out what she thinks of you and get back to you. You know, it's just like,
Oh, that's good.
wow, I mean, you could just write me a letter or something. But yeah, I feel like it's a good self-flagellation to just really toughen yourself up so that you feel nothing eventually, and then you can just plow ahead and be impervious.
If you're completely numb.
Yeah, but I mean with like Goodreads, for instance, it's sort of known in the industry to be somewhat unreliable. Unfortunately, all things tend to get corrupted by interests, and so, you know, there are review bombs that are just malicious, and there's a lot of reviews. So like, hopefully we don't have the time to be reading all of those, and I don't even know that it's super helpful, like, because it's really hard to kind of sort out what might be true or real from what is just like your opinion, man, you know?
I have a friend who's a novelist, and with her first book, like she did go and read them and was starting to feel like really bad. And then she was like, I wonder, and she went and looked up like Colson Whitehead. I think it was Underground Railroad, just a book that like she loved, that she knew was fantastic, and saw like the vicious things written. She was like, oh,
Yeah.
it's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yes.
It's fine. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who do Goodreads in good faith, and I think it's wonderful for other readers, you know, because there's so many books, and like your paper or magazine of choice is gonna review what, like 2, 4, you know, I mean, even the Times, which publishes like a Sunday like standalone book review, how many books that are published get reviewed in that over week 10, and like 4 of them are probably like a roundup of children's books, you know, or like a roundup of thrillers kind of thing. So a lot of the time a book that you see in the bookstore or that you hear about might not have received a review in a publication that you trust, if anyone trusts. Please trust publications. And so I think Goodreads is great for crowdsourcing, and so I do think that there are a lot of people who do it in good faith, and I do think it's really helpful for other readers. So I would say keep going, like keep doing it, but I sort of like, yeah.
And I also understand it as like, it's a little bit like singing in the shower. Like, I don't think I didn't, when I would write reviews, I didn't have any sense of like, I never imagined that an author would read my review, you know, so I just like, let him have it, whatever, you know, so I kind of just let him sing, like, whatever. Other questions? That was a good one.
How do you two know each other? Like, how'd you get connected? Are you old friends?
Well, we have the same editor, and what's so funny is I live in New York, where the editor lives, Megan, who's so wonderful. Like, when the book was out on submission, I was like, you know, just like, please let it be Megan Lynch, because I really, like, I love her taste, and Flattern makes really sexy books, you know, so I knew it would have like a, actually, I saw that, and I was like, it's too sexy. I was like, the second one actually has a lot more sex in it, and I was like, what's the cover of the second one? But Jacqueline's actually met her, and I've been supposed to meet her like 3 different times, and so I'm like low-key convinced she's just like 3 kids like in a trench coat at this point, but she is so great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when is your next book coming out?
I don't know, they haven't told me yet. You know, I turned it in like November 1st, and I just got the
Oh,
first
wow.
email from Megan. And there were some like really good things in the email, you know, like Patricia Highsmith was mentioned, Emma Klein was mentioned, like
Wow.
Rich Deep, but she said, I have so many ideas, it has terrific potential. So now I'm like one of those Talmudic scholars that like spends their whole life like unpacking one Bible verse, and that verse is terrific potential, because that could mean everything
Yeah.
from like it's gonna be big to, oh my god, it's so cute, you have some ideas here, how about a total rewrite? So I don't know, yeah.
Well, that's so exciting. Do you have a title that we can be looking for?
Yeah, right now it's called Flash Out. It was called Paradise Now, which is a famous piece by the Living Theater, and I was like, too famous and possibly under copyright.
Yeah.
But Flash Out is what the Living Theater used to write at the end of their scenes instead of a blackout. So instead of blacking out, you would flash out, you know, and it's this kind of like light that would sort of like blind you. So,
That's so exciting.
yeah,
I'm so excited to read it.
yeah,
This is, amazing.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I think we did it. Did we do it?
Here's a goofy one. Are there any maybe less obvious or even secret parallels between you and your protagonist?
Oh,
I mean,
interesting.
I definitely gave her my joke is that like she had to have good taste, right? So she has a lot of my taste, I would say, for sure. And a lot of the things that she thinks about theater are things that I have definitely thought about theater. But I would say that we conduct our personal lives and, you know, I think it's helpful that we conduct them in different ways. So it's mostly that. But I have a nice imagination when it comes to character. I'm just gonna pat myself on the back a little bit. I have a nice imagination when it comes to dialogue, but I'm really, really bad at imagining spaces for some reason. Like I can only imagine places that I've basically been. And so her apartment is a lot like my first apartment in the East Village, although it was not a studio. But where she lives is very close to where I used to live. The places she goes to are places that I used to go to when I was writing about the magazine where she works. I was definitely picturing the old Village Voice offices because I just need something concrete and real in terms of visual stuff. So yeah,
I feel the same way.
yeah, I can imagine character, I can imagine like story all day, but I can't imagine spaces that I haven't been to.
And it's not even that necessary. Like if you find a cool space, just take
Yeah,
it.
just take it, you
And
know,
write it in order.
friends'
Yeah,
houses,
why
yeah,
not?
yeah, places you grew up, yeah.
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 Anything else?
Great, well, we have plenty of books in the front to be signed.
Let's do a.
Yeah. Thank you for coming out. Do you have to run home or can you get a bite? Can you guys get a bite after or do you have to run?
Yeah.
You have so many children.
Yeah.
One of them is now doing a ton of performance.
Yeah, exactly.
I was thinking kids, I guess, but I haven't
Wait,
been.
it's full. Yeah.
It's full.
I'm doing a ton of performance. Something at the Guthrie today?
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I haven't been there yet. I guess it's fairly new, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I was thinking. Okay.
How old are they?
Oh, okay. I don't know what else
Wow.
is
Are
around
they
here.
going to college next year or conservatory?
No,
or-
they're in the Guthrie BFA
Oh
program.
my
now.
god, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Congratulations. And how old are the other two?
16 and 12.
And how, wait, how old are you? So,
Good.
Do you want to meet with them at all?
No.
If not, that's okay.
No.
Okay, sure. This is so pretty without it.